It's a scene that plays out in airports 1,000 times a day. A frustrated passenger, an overzealous gate agent, a flight you're not going to make. It's an inconvenience, a footnote in a travel day. But what if the passenger you dismissed was not just another face in the crowd? What if he was a federal judge? And what if the airline that disrespected him, that barred him from his flight, had its top lawyers on that very plane, unknowingly rushing to his courtroom for the most important case of their careers? They had no idea that the quiet, dignified man they saw being humiliated at gate C27 held their company's fate, a multi-million-dollar lawsuit, and their professional futures entirely in the palm of his hand. This is the story of how a routine travel hassle ignited a corporate catastrophe and delivered a lesson in karma so swift and severe it became a whispered legend in legal circles from coast to coast. The air in Terminal 3 of Chicago O'Hare International Airport was a thick soup of human anxiety. It smelled of stale coffee jet fuel and the faint, sweet perfume of Cinnabon fighting a losing battle against recycled air. Announcements for final boarding calls echoed like the pronouncements of impatient gods, overlapping with the frantic clicks of roller bags on linoleum and the murmur of 1,000 strained conversations. Amidst this curated chaos at gate C27 sat Judge Arthur Galloway. To the casual observer, he was unremarkable, and that was precisely how he liked it. At 63, he had a presence that was more about stillness than stature. He wore simple, comfortable grey slacks, a dark blue polo shirt, and well-worn leather loafers. The only hint of his profession was the weighty leather-bound book he was reading, not a legal text, but a dense history of the Roman Republic. His face, framed by close-cropped silver hair, was a study in calm concentration. The deep lines etched around his eyes and mouth were not from stress, but from decades of listening, truly listening to the tangled stories of human failing and aspiration that paraded through his courtroom. He was flying to Philadelphia for a keynote address at the University of Pennsylvania Law School, his alma mater. It was a trip he made with a quiet sense of pride, a pilgrimage to the place that had forged the tools of his life's work. His flight Apex Air 718 was scheduled to board in 20 minutes. He finished a chapter, placed a thin leather bookmark inside, and closed the book with a soft sigh. He glanced at his boarding pass Group 3. He preferred to board last to minimize the time spent in the cramped confines of the aluminum tube. He stretched his legs, feeling the familiar ache in his lower back, a souvenir from years spent on the unforgiving bench. A new gate agent arrived, a woman whose name tag read Brenda. She walked with a clipped, officious energy, her shoulders set with the self-importance of someone wielding a small but absolute dominion. She scanned the waiting area, her eyes flitting past Judge Galloway without a second glance. He was just part of the scenery. The pre-boarding announcement for passengers needing extra assistance crackled over the PA system. Then came the first-class and elite status members. Judge Galloway watched them, a detached observer of this temporary, transient society. He saw a young family struggling with a stroller, a businessman barking into a phone, 2 college students laughing at a video on their laptop. Finally, the call for Group 3 echoed. The judge gathered his small carry-on bag and his briefcase, which contained his speech and a few personal effects, and joined the shuffling line. The briefcase was old, its leather softened and scarred from decades of use. It had been a gift from his late wife, Rebecca, when he'd first made partner at a private firm, long before his appointment to the federal bench. Carrying it was a ritual, a connection to a life beyond the black robe. When he reached the podium, he handed his boarding pass and driver's license to Brenda. She scanned the pass. Beep, beep, beep. A flash of red on her screen. Her smile, which had been plastered on for the previous passengers, vanished. "Sir, there's a problem with your ticket." "Oh," Judge Galloway said, his voice even and calm. "I wasn't aware of any issue. The system has flagged your seat for a weight and balance review," she said, reciting the line as if from a script. "We've had to reseat you." "That's fine," the judge replied. "Whatever is easiest." Brenda's fingers tapped furiously on her keyboard, her brow furrowed. "Okay, I have a new seat for you, 34B, a middle seat." She started to print the new pass, then she stopped. Her eyes narrowed, flicking from her screen to his two bags, then back to him. "Sir," she said, her tone shifting from procedural to accusatory. "You have two carry-on items." "Yes," he confirmed. "A personal item and a carry-on bag, as permitted by your airline's policy." "That briefcase is too large to be a personal item," she declared, pointing a perfectly manicured but accusatory finger at the worn leather case. "It has to be consolidated, or you'll have to check one." Judge Galloway looked at his briefcase. It was a standard, unassuming size, no larger than the designer tote bags and stuffed backpacks he had seen every other passenger carry aboard. For a moment, he thought she must be joking. "I can assure you, it fits perfectly under the seat in front of me," he said politely. "I've flown with it hundreds of times on this very airline." Brenda's lips thinned into a hard line. She was a guardian of rules, and in her small kingdom, the rules were whatever she interpreted them to be in that moment. "Sir, our policy has been updated for passenger safety and convenience. The bag is too large. You need to check it." "There isn't time to check it now," the judge stated, glancing at the line forming behind him. "And it contains personal documents and electronics. I can't check it." "Then you need to consolidate," she repeated, her voice rising in volume, drawing glances from nearby passengers. "You can put the contents of one bag into the other." Judge Galloway felt a flicker of annoyance, the first ripple in his placid demeanor. He was being singled out. He looked at the passengers who had just passed the man with the overstuffed duffel bag, the woman with a large purse, and a separate bag from duty-free. The rule was being applied with a curious and sudden specificity. "That seems unreasonable," he said, his voice still low, but now with a new edge of firmness. "Could you please show me the sizing dimensions for a personal item that this briefcase violates?" Brenda's face flushed. She had been challenged. "Sir, I don't have time to debate airline policy with you. You're holding up the line. Consolidate your bags, check one, or you won't be boarding." The ultimatum hung in the air, sharp and ugly. Judge Arthur Galloway, a man who commanded the respect of the most powerful lawyers in the country, a man whose decisions could alter the course of corporations, and lives stood at Gate C-27, being publicly chastised over a briefcase. And the situation was about to get much, much worse. The line behind Judge Galloway was growing restless. Murmurs rippled through the queue, a mix of sympathy and impatience. No one wanted a delay. "Ma'am," the judge began again, adopting the same measured tone he used to de-escalate a heated courtroom exchange. "I am not trying to be difficult. I am simply stating that my bag complies with your stated policy. Perhaps your supervisor could clarify he had offered her an out, a way to save face by deferring to a higher power. It was a strategy of diplomacy he had honed over a lifetime." Brenda, however, perceived it not as an olive branch, but as a direct assault on her authority. "My supervisor will tell you the exact same thing," she snapped. "I know the policy. You are the one who is failing to comply." Her voice was now loud enough that conversations 10 feet away halted. People were openly staring. The judge felt the familiar, unpleasant heat of being othered, the subject of a public spectacle. He was no longer a passenger. He was a problem. "There is no need to raise your voice," he said, his own volume dropping in inverse proportion to hers. "Let's just be reasonable." "Reasonable is following the rules," she retorted. "You think the rules don't apply to you?" The accusation, so loaded and so baseless, stung more than he would ever let on. His entire life was a monument to the rule of law, to the principle that order and fairness were paramount. To be accused of the very opposite by this petty tyrant of the boarding gate was an irony of exquisite bitterness. As if summoned by the conflict, a man in a slightly better-fitting Apex Air uniform appeared. His name tag read, "Ron Gate Supervisor." He had the weary, perpetually hassled look of a man who dealt exclusively in complaints. "What's the issue here, Brenda?" he asked, not even looking at the judge. "This passenger is refusing to comply with the carry-on baggage policy," Brenda announced triumphantly, as if presenting Exhibit A. "He has 2 oversized items and won't check either of them." Ron finally turned his attention to Judge Galloway, his eyes performing a quick, dismissive scan. He saw a middle-aged black man in a polo shirt and slacks. No fancy suit, no first-class ticket, no shiny elite status luggage tag. An economy passenger arguing over a bag. In his mental calculus, this was a low-priority, high-annoyance problem. "Sir," Ron said, his voice dripping with condescension, "my agent has explained the policy. It's really very simple. 1 carry-on, 1 personal item. Your briefcase is too big for a personal item. We can check it for you at the gate." "For a fee, of course," Judge Galloway noted dryly. "Of course," Ron confirmed without a trace of irony. $65 for a gate-checked bag. This was no longer about policy. It was about revenue and power. The judge recognized the pattern immediately. It was a shakedown, wrapped in the language of regulation. "I am not paying to check a bag that is compliant with your policy." The judge stated, his calm resolve hardening. "Furthermore, it contains the manuscript for a speech I am delivering tomorrow morning. It cannot leave my possession." Ron exchanged a look with Brenda. It was a look of shared exasperation, the kind reserved for the truly delusional. "A speech, right?" Ron scoffed. He then leaned in, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial, threatening growl. "Look, pal, I don't have time for this. You're causing a scene, and you're delaying the departure of this aircraft. That is a federal offense, in case you didn't know. So here are your choices. Check the bag, leave it behind, or we can have airport security escort you from the gate. What's it going to be?" The threat was laughable in its absurdity. A federal judge being threatened with federal offenses by an airport supervisor. But in this moment, in this place, the power dynamic was inverted. Here, Ron was the law. The judge felt a profound sense of weariness wash over him. He could fight this. He could demand to see the written policy to speak to a corporate representative. He could create a monumental scene that would undoubtedly prove his point. But at what cost? He would miss his flight, jeopardize his commitment in Philadelphia, and for what? To win a pointless battle against 2 people who were immune to reason. He made a decision. With a slow, deliberate movement, he took a step back from the podium. "You have made your position clear," Judge Galloway said, his voice devoid of anger. It was the voice of a man rendering a final judgment. "You are refusing to honor my ticket and denying me passage." "No," Ron countered, sensing a shift. "You are refusing to comply. It's your choice." "Is it?" The judge asked a rhetorical question that hung in the air. He looked at Ron, then at Brenda. He didn't see malice in their eyes, but something far more common, and in some ways more dangerous, the dull, unthinking certainty of the willfully ignorant. They saw what they expected to see: a problem to be managed, not a person to be respected. "Very well," he said. He turned his back straight and began to walk away from the gate, his 2 bags in hand. The quiet dignity of his retreat was more damning than any shouted argument could have been. He left a wake of silence. Even Ron and Brenda seemed momentarily stunned that he had simply walked away. As he moved down the concourse, two men in exquisitely tailored suits hurried past him, rushing towards gate C27. They were laughing about something, their expensive briefcases swinging by their sides. "Can you believe the traffic?" the older one said. "Charles, we almost missed it." "Relax, Robert," the younger man. Charles Kensington replied with a smug grin. They wouldn't dare leave without the legal team for Apex Air. We're flying on the company's dime, after all. They brushed past Judge Galloway without a glance. They were important men on an important mission, heading to an important court case. They handed their first-class boarding passes to Brenda, who greeted them with a dazzling, deferential smile. They were the last to board. As the gate door closed behind them, Charles Kensington glanced back down the empty jet bridge and saw the lone figure of the man in the polo shirt walking away. He gave a slight shake of his head. Some people just loved to make trouble. Aboard Apex Air 718, Charles Kensington settled into his plush leather seat in 2A. He accepted a pre-departure glass of champagne from a flight attendant, the very picture of corporate success. At 38, he was the youngest partner at the prestigious Chicago law firm of Sterling and Finch. He was brilliant, ambitious, and possessed an ego that could cast its own shadow. His senior associate, Sarah Jenkins, sat across the aisle in 2C. She was sharp, meticulous, and perpetually anxious, a common affliction for those who worked in Kensington's orbit. She was poring over her notes for the hearing, her tablet glowing in the dimming cabin light. "You can relax, Sarah," Kensington said, taking a sip of his champagne. "This is a slam dunk, a preliminary injunction hearing. Judge, what's his name again?" "Galloway, sir," Sarah provided, not looking up. "Judge Arthur Galloway. And I wouldn't call it a slam dunk. The plaintiff's argument for certification of the class action has some merit." The case was Peterson et al. v. Apex Air Inc., a massive class action lawsuit filed on behalf of over 50,000 passengers who were allegedly wrongfully charged ancillary fees due to a deliberately confusing booking system. The potential liability for Apex Air was staggering easily, north of $100 million. Today's hearing was crucial, a motion to dismiss filed by Sterling and Finch aimed at gutting the lawsuit before it could even get off the ground. "Merit?" Kensington scoffed. "It's a nuisance suitor shakedown. Galloway will see right through it. He's an old-school judge appointed by Reagan, a textualist. He'll look at the plain language of the terms and conditions, and that will be that. We'll be out of there by noon and having lunch at the Union League." Sarah wasn't so sure. She had researched Judge Galloway extensively. While he was indeed known for his rigorous intellectual approach to the law, he was also fiercely independent and had a reputation for being deeply unimpressed by corporate bluster. He was known in legal circles as the Sphinx for his inscrutable demeanor on the bench. More than one arrogant litigator had seen their case crumble to dust under his quiet, penetrating gaze. "I just think we shouldn't underestimate the optics, Charles," she said, finally looking at him. "Or the judge. The only optics I'm concerned with are the ones from the windows of the Four Seasons tonight, after we celebrate," he said, waving a dismissive hand. He leaned back as the plane began its pushback from the gate. "Speaking of optics, did you see that guy back at the gate? The one giving the agents a hard time?" Sarah frowned, trying to recall. "The older gentleman in the blue shirt?" "That's the one," Kensington said with a chuckle. "Arguing over his little briefcase like it was the nuclear football, holding up the whole flight. You have to love the sense of entitlement. Thinks because he bought a ticket he owns the plane." Sarah had seen the end of the exchange. She had seen the man's quiet retreat, and it hadn't struck her as entitlement. It had struck her as a moment of profound, weary resignation. There was a dignity in the way he walked away that stuck with her. "I don't know," she said quietly. He seemed calm. The gate agent seemed pretty agitated. "They have a job to do," Kensington said, draining his glass as the plane taxied towards the runway. "Can't let every passenger with a grievance dictate the terms. It's the same principle as our case, really. Apex has its terms of service. The plaintiffs agreed to them. End of story." He put on his noise-cancelling headphones, signaling the end of the conversation. Sarah turned back to her tablet, but her focus was gone. The image of the man at the gate lingered in her mind. There was something about his face, a kind of scholarly gravitas that seemed familiar. She felt a prickle of unease, a tiny stray thread in the carefully woven fabric of their legal strategy. She tried to dismiss it, blaming it on pre-hearing jitters. The plane roared down the runway and lifted into the grey Chicago sky, banking east toward Philadelphia. Below them, Judge Arthur Galloway was sitting in the airport's Admirals Club, a courtesy extended to him by a sympathetic ticketing agent from another airline who had witnessed the whole affair. He had been rebooked on a 4 p.m. flight. He wasn't angry. Anger was a corrosive emotion, unproductive. Instead, he was contemplative. He made a single phone call. "This is Judge Galloway," he said, when the other line picked up. "Is this Michael?" "Yes, Your Honor," came the voice of his head clerk, Michael Chen. "Is everything all right? You should be in the air." "There has been a slight delay in my travel plans." The judge said, his voice a masterpiece of understatement. "I won't be landing in Philadelphia until this evening. We'll need to move tomorrow morning's 9 o'clock hearing." "Of course, Judge. To when?" "Move it to 1 o'clock in the afternoon. That should give me ample time," he instructed. "Please inform all relevant parties of the schedule change." "And Michael?" He added a thoughtful pause in his voice. "Please pull the full corporate filing for the defendant in that hearing, Peterson et al. I want to see the complete list of their officers and primary legal counsel." "Right away, Your Honor," Michael said, a hint of curiosity in his tone. The judge hung up. He leaned his head back against the lounge chair and closed his eyes. He wasn't thinking about revenge. He was a man of the law, and the law was impartial, but he was also a man of profound observation, and he had observed a telling instance of corporate culture in action at Gate C-27. The arrogance, the dismissiveness, the rigid application of a nonsensical rule, it was a microcosm. And as a judge, it was his duty to understand the true character of the entities that appeared before him. Apex Air through its employees. Brenda and Ron had just provided him with a valuable, unsolicited piece of evidence. The flight to Philadelphia was smooth and uneventful. Charles Kensington slept for most of it, a man untroubled by doubt. Sarah Jenkins, however, spent the 2 hours in a state of low-grade anxiety, rereading depositions, and trying to shake the unsettling feeling that she was overlooking something crucial. They landed on time, collected their bags, and took a black car service directly to the James A. Byrne U.S. Courthouse, a formidable modern structure of glass and stone. They wanted to check in with the clerk and get a feel for the courtroom ahead of the next day's hearing. "See?" Kensington said as they walked up the grand stone steps. "Smooth as silk. We're here checked in and ready to win before that old guy from the airport has even found a new flight." They passed through security and made their way to the clerk's office for the district court. A notice was taped to the glass window. "Attention schedule change. Case number 225-CV00-8887. Peterson et al. v. Apex Air Inc. The hearing on the defendant's motion. To dismiss originally scheduled for Thursday, September 19th, at 9:00 am in Courtroom. 14A has been rescheduled to 1:00 p.m. by order of the court, the Honourable Arthur W. Galloway. Kensington groaned. Wonderful. 4 extra hours to kill in Philadelphia. Galloway must have a golf game. See Sarah. These old-timers have it made. Sarah stared at the notice, her eyes fixed on the name. Arthur W. Galloway. The name itself wasn't what bothered her. It was the nagging sense of familiarity she'd felt at the airport. It was a long shot, a wild, impossible coincidence, but she had to check. "Charles, I'm going to find the restroom," she said, her voice a little tight. "I'll meet you in the lobby." Instead of the restroom, she found a quiet alcove, pulled out her phone, and opened her web browser. Her fingers trembled slightly as she typed Judge Arthur W. Galloway into the search bar. The first result was his official court biography. The second was a link to images. She tapped it. The screen filled with photos. There were pictures of him in his judicial robes looking stern and imposing. There were photos of him at conferences, standing at podiums. And then she saw it. A more recent candid photo from a university event. He was wearing a suit, but it was unmistakably the same man. The same calm, intelligent eyes, the same dignified posture, the same man who had been dressed down in public by Brenda and Ron, the same man who Charles had mockingly called pal. The man from gate C27, the blood drained from Sarah's face. Her phone felt slick in her suddenly sweaty palm. The air in the courthouse alcove seemed to vanish, replaced by a buzzing vacuum. It can't be. She scrolled frantically, her heart hammering against her ribs. Every photo confirmed the impossible. The man Apex Air had just unceremoniously barred from their flight was the very judge who held the fate of their $100 million lawsuit in his hands. He hadn't just been inconvenienced, he had been personally disrespected by the very company petitioning his court for relief. She stumbled out of the alcove, her face pale as parchment. Kensington was standing by the entrance checking his email. "Ready for that early lunch?" he asked breezily. "Charles," she whispered, her voice cracking, "what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse," she said, holding up her phone. "Much, much worse." She showed him the photo. Kensington glanced at it, then did a double take. He snatched the phone from her hand, his eyes widening in disbelief. He zoomed in on the face, then scrolled to another photo, then another. The smug confidence evaporated from his face, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. "No," he breathed. "No, it's not him. It's just a guy who looks like him." "It's him, Charles," Sarah insisted, her voice gaining strength as his waned. "I knew he looked familiar. Think about it. The flight to Philadelphia. The timing. It's all right there." Kensington leaned against a marble pillar, his legs suddenly unsteady. The implications crashed down on him like a tidal wave. They hadn't just witnessed an embarrassing customer service incident. They, as the legal representatives of Apex Air, were party to it. They had stood by while their client's employees abused a federal judge. Their federal judge. "What did I say?" He mumbled, his mind racing back to the gate. "Did I say anything? Did he see me? You called him that guy and laughed about his entitlement on the plane." Sarah reminded him, her words like little shards of ice. "And we walked right past him to get on the flight he was kicked off of." Kensington's face went from pale to a sickly shade of green. He thought of his flippant comments, his smug demeanor. He thought of Judge Galloway's reputation for being observant, for missing nothing. The Sphinx. "We are dead," he whispered. "We are absolutely, unequivocally dead." He fumbled for his own phone, his hand shaking so badly it took him 3 tries to unlock it. "Who are you calling?" Sarah asked. "Amelia Vance," he said, naming Apex Air's general counsel. "I'm calling the client. We have a 5-alarm fire, and the whole courthouse is about to burn down." The call connected. "Amelia, it's Charles Kensington. We have a problem. No, that's not the right word. We have a corporate extinction level event, and it's happening tomorrow at 1 o'clock. The panic on the other end of the phone was palpable, even through the digital connection. Amelia Vance, the general counsel of Apex Air, was a woman who prided herself on being unflappable. She had handled SEC investigations, union strikes, and even a minor international incident involving a catering cart. But the news Charles Kensington delivered sent a jolt of pure ice through her veins. "Let me get this straight," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. Her team in the conference room at Apex headquarters could see the color draining from her face. "You're telling me that our gate staff at O'Hare this morning denied boarding to the presiding federal judge in the Peterson case, denied boarding, threatened and publicly humiliated him." Kensington corrected his own voice, a strained whisper. "Sarah and I witnessed the aftermath. We're standing in the courthouse right now." There was a long, terrifying silence on the line. Amelia Vance was processing the cascading series of disasters this single event had triggered. First, the legal implications. Any hope they had of a swift, impartial ruling on their motion to dismiss was gone. Even if Judge Galloway was the most ethical jurist in American history, the potential for subconscious bias was immense. How could he not be influenced by the memory of being treated like a criminal by the very company asking him for a favorable judgment? Their chances of winning the motion had just plummeted from probable to nearly impossible. Second, the ethical nightmare. They now had ex parte knowledge of a situation involving the judge that the plaintiff's counsel didn't. What were their obligations? Should they disclose it? The thought of filing a motion explaining that their own employees had abused the judge was mortifying. It would be an admission of guilt and incompetence that would be gleefully leaked to the press. Third, and perhaps worst of all, was the personal insult to a man who held their fate in his hands. They hadn't just angered a customer, they had insulted a man whose entire professional life was built on the concept of respect for the institution of the law, and Apex Air, through its agents, had shown that institution, in his very person, zero respect. "Get me names," Amelia commanded, snapping into crisis mode. "I want the names of the gate agent and the supervisor. I want the exact time of the incident. I want you to write down every single word you remember hearing from anyone. Do it now." She hung up without saying goodbye and jabbed a button on her desk phone. "Get me Frank Moretti in operations now, and pull every bit of security footage and audio from ORD Terminal 3 Gate C27 from 7:00 a.m. to 9:00 a.m. this morning. I want it yesterday." Within 30 minutes, the C-suite at Apex Air headquarters was in lockdown. The CEO, Mark Hastings, a man with a perpetual tan and a booming voice, was uncharacteristically silent, his face ashen. Amelia Vance projected the airport security footage onto the large screen in the boardroom. There it was in grainy, silent color. They saw Judge Galloway in line, calm and patient. They saw Brenda, the gate agent, her body language growing more aggressive. They saw her point at his bag. They saw him respond, his posture unchanging. Then they saw Ron, the supervisor, arrive leaning into the judge's space, his face contorted in a sneer. They couldn't hear the words, but the gestures were damning. They saw Ron threaten point and dismiss, and then they saw the most damning part of all. They saw their own high-priced lawyers, Kensington and Jenkins, sweep past the judge without a second look, getting the deferential treatment reserved for the privileged, as Judge Galloway walked away in defeat. The visual was catastrophic. It was a perfect silent film about corporate arrogance and class disparity. "Oh my God," the head of public relations whispered. "If this gets out—" "It won't get out if we handle it," Amelia snapped, though she knew it was a fool's hope. The internal report from Ron the supervisor arrived via email. Amelia read it aloud to the stunned room. "Passenger Arthur Galloway, PNR. Z4Y7K2 became belligerent and disruptive at gate C27 when informed of standard baggage policy, refused to comply with crew member instructions, was verbally abusive, and caused a delay to the boarding process. Per protocol, he was denied boarding to ensure the safety and security of the flight." The report was a work of pure fiction, a pathetic attempt at self-preservation that was now Exhibit A in the company's self-immolation. "He lied," the CEO, Hastings, said, his voice a low growl. "The son of a bitch lied on an official report." "Of course he lied," Amelia said, her disgust palpable. "This is the culture we've inadvertently built, a culture of the customer is always the problem." "We incentivize gate agents to collect bag fees and to close the doors on time no matter what. We gave them the hammer, and to them everyone, including a federal judge, looks like a nail." The room was silent, the gravity of their predicament sinking in. They had been so focused on the legal arguments, the fine print of their terms of service. They had built a multi-million-dollar defense around the idea that Apex Air was a company of rules and procedures, and now the very judge ruling on that defense had been shown in the most personal way imaginable that their rules were a sham, capriciously and cruelly enforced by employees who lied on official reports. "What do we do?" Hastings asked the question, hanging in the air like smoke. "There are no good options," Amelia admitted, rubbing her temples. "There are only varying degrees of disaster. We could file for a recusal, but on what grounds? Your Honor, we request you recuse yourself, because our employees were monstrous to you." "That's suicide. It admits everything and guarantees this story hits the Wall Street Journal by morning." "So we do nothing." "We do nothing," Amelia confirmed. "We send Kensington and Jenkins into that courtroom tomorrow. They will be professional, they will be humble, and they will be prepared for the worst. They will not mention the incident. They will act as if it never happened. We have to pray, and I am not a religious woman, that Judge Galloway is the consummate professional his reputation suggests, and that he can somehow separate the man from the jurist." She paused, looking around the table at the terrified faces of the airline's leadership. "In the meantime," she continued, her voice cold as steel, "I want Brenda and Ron's employee files on my desk. They are to be suspended pending termination. And someone get me a number for the University of Pennsylvania Law School. Find out who is in charge of Judge Galloway's speaking engagement. We're going to start the world's most delicate, high-stakes apology tour. We're not just in legal trouble anymore. We are in the karma business, and the bill has just come due." The morning of the hearing was excruciating. Charles Kensington and Sarah Jenkins sat in their hotel conference room, ostensibly preparing, but in reality, they were trapped in a state of suspended dread. The usual pre-court adrenaline was gone, replaced by the cold, heavy certainty of doom. Every legal argument, every citation, every carefully crafted point for their motion to dismiss now felt utterly ridiculous. They had planned to argue that Apex Air's terms of service were clear, and that passengers were bound by them. How could they make that argument with a straight face to a man who, their own company had demonstrated, did not abide by any discernible, fairly applied rules? "We should just withdraw the motion," Kensington said for the 10th time, pacing the room. "We call the plaintiffs' counsel, offer them a settlement, a big one. Make this all go away." Amelia said no. Sarah reminded him, her voice flat. She said any sudden move looks like an admission of guilt. It would spook the other side, make them think we're hiding something even worse. "We have to go in there and take our medicine." "This isn't medicine, Sarah. This is a public execution," he muttered, loosening a tie that suddenly felt like a noose. The walk from the taxi to the courthouse steps was the longest of Kensington's life. Every person they passed seemed to be staring, knowing. The courthouse itself, which yesterday had felt like his arena, now felt like a place of judgment in the most biblical sense. They arrived outside Courtroom 14A at 12:45 p.m. The room was already populated with the opposing counsel, a team from a scrappy Philadelphia firm led by a veteran litigator named David Chen. Chen gave them a curious look. Kensington, usually a peacock of confidence, before a hearing looked pale and haunted. At precisely 100 p.m., a bailiff's voice boomed through the room. "All rise. This court is now in session. The Honourable Arthur W. Galloway presiding." The heavy oak doors behind the bench opened, and Judge Galloway emerged. He was no longer the man in the polo shirt from the airport. He was cloaked in the severe black robes of his office, an emblem of the immense power and responsibility he wielded. He moved to his seat with a deliberate, unhurried grace, the years of authority settled comfortably on his shoulders. He sat, and everyone followed. The room was silent. Judge Galloway shuffled some papers, his face impassive, a mask of judicial neutrality. He didn't look at the defense table. He didn't look at the plaintiffs. He looked at a point somewhere in the middle distance. Sarah Jenkins dared a glance at him. There was no flicker of recognition, no hint of anger or resentment. His expression was absolutely, terrifyingly blank. It was the Sphinx in his natural habitat. This, she realized, was far worse than open hostility. An angry judge you could anticipate. A neutral judge who you knew had every reason not to be neutral was an instrument of pure, unpredictable terror. "Good afternoon, counsel." The judge began his voice, the same calm, resonant baritone she remembered from the gate. "We are here today, on case number 225, CV-0187, Peterson et al. Versus Apex Air Incorporated. We are here to hear arguments on the defendant's motion to dismiss for failure to state a claim upon which relief can be granted. Mr. Kensington, you may begin when you're ready." He looked directly at Charles Kensington for the first time. It was just a glance, a simple professional moment of eye contact. But for Kensington, it was like being struck by lightning. In that fleeting second, he saw the man from the gate, and he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that the judge saw him too. He saw the lawyer who had hurried past him, the lawyer representing the company that had just treated him with such contempt. Kensington's throat went dry. His meticulously prepared opening statement, a symphony of corporate confidence and legal precedent, vanished from his mind. He stood his hands gripping the sides of the lectern to keep them from shaking. May it please the court." He stammered his voice, a hoarse croak. He cleared his throat. "Your Honor, counsel, Charles Kensington for the defendant Apex Air." He began his argument, but the words felt like ash in his mouth. He cited case law on the sanctity of contracts, the doctrine of voluntary agreement. Every word felt like a lie. He was extolling the virtues of a company that had just 24 hours prior demonstrated it had none. He could feel the judge's eyes on him, not with anger, but with an unnerving, analytical stillness. It felt as if Judge Galloway wasn't just listening to his legal argument. He was examining his soul. Kensington faltered, losing his place in his notes. He glanced at Sarah, who looked back with wide, terrified eyes. He was tanking. He was falling apart under the silent pressure of what was unsaid. Judge Galloway let the silence stretch for an uncomfortable 5 seconds. "Mr. Kensington," the judge said, his tone perfectly level, "are you asserting that the terms of service, as presented during the online booking process, are so clear and unambiguous that no reasonable consumer could possibly be misled?" "Yes, Your Honor. That is the core of our position," Kensington managed to say. "And you are further asserting," the judge continued, leaning forward slightly, "that the defendant Apex Air applies its stated policies uniformly and reasonably in all interactions with its customers." The question was a masterstroke of judicial cruelty wrapped in the guise of a simple query. It was the entire case and the entire airport incident distilled into a single devastating question. Kensington was trapped. If he said yes, he was lying to the face of a man who knew firsthand that it was untrue. If he said no, his entire motion to dismiss would collapse. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. In that moment, Charles Kensington's career, the $100 million lawsuit, and the reputation of Apex Air all hung suspended on the tip of a question he could not possibly answer. The karma wasn't loud or vengeful. It was quiet, precise, and utterly devastating. Charles Kensington stood frozen at the lectern, the judge's question echoing in the silent courtroom. It was a perfectly legitimate legal question, yet it felt like a dagger aimed directly at his heart. He knew, and more importantly, the judge knew, that the honest answer would obliterate his case. We believe," Kensington finally stammered, his voice cracking, "that our policies are designed to be applied consistently, Your Honor." It was a weak, evasive answer, and everyone in the room knew it. Judge Galloway's expression did not change, but he made a small, deliberate note on the legal pad in front of him. That single silent gesture felt more damning than any verbal rebuke. Kensington stumbled through the rest of his argument, his confidence shattered. He was no longer a brilliant litigator. He was a defendant on the stand. When David Chen, the plaintiff's counsel, rose to present his rebuttal, he found his job was remarkably easy. He didn't need to attack Kensington's arguments. Kensington had already immolated them himself. Chen simply laid out the case, a pattern of confusing fees, a system designed to entrap, and a corporate culture that prioritized profit over people. He didn't know how right he was, but every word resonated with an unspoken truth that hung heavy in the room. Judge Galloway listened to both sides without interruption. When they were finished, he looked out over the courtroom. "Thank you, counsel," he said. "The court has heard your arguments. I will take the motion under advisement and issue a written ruling in due course. We are adjourned." He struck the gavel once. The sharp crack echoed like a gunshot. With that, he stood and swept out of the courtroom, his black robes trailing behind him like the very shadow of justice. The Apex Air team was in shock. There was no ruling, no immediate decision, but they knew they had lost. They had been psychologically dismantled without the judge ever raising his voice or mentioning the airport. His quiet professionalism was his revenge. By being a perfect judge, he had forced them to confront their own company's profound imperfections. The call to Amelia Vance was grim. "We're done," Kensington told her. He knows. He didn't say a word about it, but he knows. He eviscerated us with a single question. Within the hour, Amelia Vance was on the phone with David Chen. She didn't haggle. She didn't bluff. She offered a settlement that was astronomical, far more than the plaintiffs had ever hoped to win at trial. She agreed to pay their legal fees, simplify the airline's booking process, and issue a public statement of apology for their lack of transparency. Chen, stunned by the sudden and complete capitulation, accepted immediately. The fallout inside Apex Air was brutal and swift. An internal investigation, spurred by the near disaster, uncovered a systemic problem of poor training and a hostile customer service culture. Brenda and Ron were terminated, not for the incident with the judge, but for falsifying a corporate report and a documented history of customer complaints. The story of what really happened became a cautionary legend whispered in break rooms and training seminars for years to come. A reminder of what could happen when you forget your humanity. At Sterling and Finch, Charles Kensington's star was permanently tarnished. The story, in a heavily redacted and anonymized form, made the rounds. He was seen as the lawyer who was so oblivious he didn't recognize the judge who held his client's fate in his hands. He kept his job, but his path to the firm's leadership was forever closed. Sarah Jenkins, however, learned a profound lesson. She became known for her meticulous preparation, which now included not just legal precedent, but a deep understanding of the human element of every case. She remembered the quiet dignity of the man at the gate and carried it into her own practice. Weeks later, Judge Galloway's office issued a single-page ruling on the now moot motion to dismiss. It was dry technical and granted the dismissal without prejudice, as the parties have reached a settlement. It contained no emotion, no hint of the drama that had unfolded. The judge never spoke of the incident at O'Hare to anyone. He delivered his keynote address at Penn Law to great acclaim. He continued to preside over his cases with the same unimpeachable fairness and intellectual rigor for which he was known. But those who knew him best noticed a new line in his speeches, a new emphasis in his lectures to young lawyers. He would often end by telling them, "The law is more than statutes and precedents. It is at its heart about people. Remember that when you deal with your clients, your opponents, and every single person you meet, treat everyone you encounter with the dignity and respect that you yourself would wish to be afforded. Not just because it is right, but because you never ever know who you are talking to." The scales of justice, he knew, were not confined to the courtroom. Sometimes they balanced themselves perfectly right at the boarding gate. The story of Judge Arthur Galloway and Apex Air is a stark and powerful reminder that our actions, even the seemingly small ones, have ripples we can't possibly foresee. It's a lesson that the person you dismiss in a moment of impatience today might hold your entire future in their hands tomorrow. It's about the silent, crushing weight of consequences, and how true karma isn't always a lightning strike, but often the quiet, professional execution of duty by someone you have wronged. The scales of justice don't just balance inside a courtroom. They balance in the real world, often when we least expect it. If this story of brutal, real-life karma resonated with you, please do us a favor and hit that like button. It truly helps the channel reach more people. Don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell so you won't miss our next deep dive into stories where consequences catch up with a vengeance. And now we want to hear from you. In the comments below, let us know, have you ever witnessed a moment of instant karma where someone truly got what they deserved? We'd love to read your story. Until next time, remember to be kind. You never know who you're talking to.